Has the trend from yesterday continued on the bourse today?
I think market closed lower today, declining by about 1.8% compared to yesterday's levels. About 14 stocks appreciated, only 14 appreciated in price today, while 61 stocks depreciated in prices. Some of the top gainers were Total, Nigerian Breweries and NBC, while the top losers were Corn Oil and Oando. Chevron also was part of the top losers. And then in terms of trades, activity in the banking sector was still quite active, with Access Bank trading about 1.1 billion naira, while UBA traded about 500 billion naira. While we felt the Access Bank trade was still wasn't the usual trend, but it was still more of a market demand in the sense that there were a few individuals that were interested in the stock, but overall, activity in the banking sector was still quite high.
Muyiwa, is it still profit-taking on the bourse?
I really won't say profit-taking in that sense, because the reality is that prices are still quite low. And if you look at the trend, if you look at what's been happening over the last few days, there really hasn't been so much appreciation. So I won't say there's been profit-taking. All I would say is that investors are still quite cautious, because the reality is that even though the audit results have been finalized and we all know the banks that are standing and the ones that are not, details of the audit still hasn't come out yet in terms of the various banks. So in terms of their shareholders funds, for example, you know what the current shareholders funds are. So I think that's what is still clouding a few investors' judgments, even though about just 2 banks have had the opportunity to release their audited results. That's Diamond and GT Bank, and we expect UBA to release it quite soon. But overall, we still haven't got full details of the audit yet. So I think that's why a few investors are still quite cautious.
But where would you put your money in terms of the banking stocks?
And the banking stocks, for now, I would still put my money in a few blue chip stocks. I'll put my money in First Bank, I'll put my money in GT and also Diamond Bank. And there are a few reasons why I'll pick First Bank, for example. First Bank is, I'll call it a quite focused bank. They are very strong in retail banking. They have a lot, their branch network is quite large. And then in terms of risk, I'll still say they're quite strong in risk as well. And I'm sure you'll be aware that the current CBN governor used to be head of risk there for a while before he became the MD. But overall, it's still a strong bank, even though they still had to make provisions because of their their wealth and asset management subsidiaries, but they are still quite a strong bank. And GT as well, I'll pick GT because of the strong management and also the fact that they are focused, unlike other banks that were chasing for size, their focus was really on quality and return. So it's a bank I'll also pick. And Diamond Bank, because of the Actis actually owns about 19% of the bank, and because of that, it's a private institution, a private equity institution that tries to sweat assets and get reasonable returns, and they've actually been able to deliver that. And right now, they're trying to move the bank towards retail banking as well, and that's why I'll pick those 3 as my top banks at the moment.
Let's move on to the big story coming out of Nigeria. Dangote Group has signed contracts for cement lines in Africa. How do you think it'll affect the earnings of Dangote Group?
I would say it should actually affect it positively, in the sense that it's something they all had in the pipeline originally and had to halt because of the global financial crisis. I'm sure they had issues with raising more capital, but overall I would expect it to increase their earnings, because even though it's not, they're expanding outside Nigeria, and the fact that Africa is still a net importer of cement obviously shows that there's so much demand for that. And the reality is that infrastructure in Africa is still quite low, in sub-Saharan Africa is still quite low compared to other developed parts of the world. And because of that, there will obviously still be high demand for cement at the moment. And that's why I feel it's obviously a smart move for the company. And the fact that and I would say it's still the only indigenous African company that seems to be widening its scope outside its region. And unlike the European countries like companies like Lafarge and cements that seem to be expanding in Africa and other regions.
But what's the outlook for the cement industry in Nigeria?
The outlook is still quite positive at the moment, and it's still on the back of the high demand for infrastructure. There's still so much demand for cement in Nigeria, and for example, Lagos plans to do the Lagos mega city, and the demand for cement in just that region alone is quite large, and there's still a deficit of housing in Nigeria. Trying to get cement for that bit as well would obviously, it's still there's still limits on that, and the fact is that we still import a bulk of cement. So as a whole, there's still so much demand for cement in Nigeria.
But do you think that they will be able to meet the demand, considering that Dangote Group has signed the contracts with China?
Demand in what sense? Sorry, I didn't get.
As you know, the production has been going down in Nigeria at the moment because although there's demand, Nigeria has not been able to keep up with the demand because of the production facilities there. So do you think currently they will be able to meet that demand?
No, I won't expect that they'll be able to, and that's why there's still lots of imports going on. So apart from the fact that they produce locally, they still have the license to import. So I think they'll be subsidizing that with imports at the moment.